I'm here today with Tonya Khoury from Acumen Media. We're going to be chatting about influencer marketing and the world of insights that comes along with it. So before we get started, Tonya, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Firstly, it's very lovely to be here. I have such an admiration for the Digital Fanta group. It's always a lot of fun and very informative. So thank you for that. My name's Tonya Khoury. I'm the director of Acumen Media Management. My profile says I've been winging it since 1972, and that's about right. But the true story is I work in media, in the collection, collation, interpretation, and statistical analysis of what media is doing for a brand or what it can do for a brand. So we try and take a bunch of data from the media space and then convert it into something that is worth implementing from a strategic perspective. And that can be with the you're in crisis, or if you just want to amplify your existing brand. And I do that with some cool tech. That's what I do.
And how did you get into what you do?
Crazy story. I walked into a job in Johannesburg. I was living in Pretoria and I couldn't find a decent job, and I ended up finding a job in in Johannesburg, sorry, that said it was looking for a customer services agent. And I thought, okay, I can do that. And I walked into a media monitoring company, a place where 700 people chopped up newspapers all day. And I could not believe my eyes that you could actually make money from cutting up newspapers and gluing it to a bit of paper. And that was my introduction to media collection and collation, which was called today. In those days, it was a simple cut and paste job. In fact, there was a glue room where you used to mix the glue, and everybody wanted to work in there because you got quite high in the glue room.
Wow.
So that's where I started, and I was so fascinated. I took to it straight away. Firstly, I couldn't believe the impact journalists have on a brand, how they can make or break a market share by one or two sentences, and that for every sentence a journalist puts out, you have a right to reply in the same space, the same page number, etc. So, and with the same level of contribution. And people didn't know that then. So if you didn't know your article was published, you wouldn't be able to exercise that very important right of reply. And that's really where the core focus started. And today, everybody is a journalist, aren't they? Anybody with a phone is a journalist today.
Definitely. So besides work, what do you do for fun?
Scuba dive. I am a scuba diver. I have been a diver for 15 years now. That gives you an idea how old I am. There is nothing better than going under the water because there's no phones, there's no radio, there's no television. There's just the blue open ocean, and every now and again you'll see a fish, and I love it. I love it. That's what I do.
Wow, and I guess because you live in Durban, you get to do that a lot.
In fact, I live in a tiny little place called Sudwana Bay, which is South Africa's diving mecca. So it only exists because the reefs are so good. So I've made my full stop here, and I'm a very happy woman. I can hear the ocean from my door, which is perfect.
Wow. So did you move there because of your love for scuba diving?
Absolutely. You know what's interesting is that 3 years ago, I started staying here longer and longer. So I would go from Joburg, I'd spend 3 months in Joburg, and then I'd come to Sudwana, I'd say, okay, I'm staying for a month. And then that month would become 4 months, okay? And the next thing I knew, it was 7 months. And then another year, like it was like 9 months. And then I thought, okay, why am I actually staying in Joburg? And the truth was because of clients. Having to see someone face to face then was very, very important. today, look where we've become. So actually, I got my wish with lockdown, in that the world has now realized you don't have to sit opposite each other at a boardroom table in order to get business done.
Definitely. And how long have you lived there?
I'm now in my 8th month, mashallah, for officially, but unofficially about 4 years.
No, that's amazing. So what is an influencer?
Oh, that word. I'm so not fond of the word influencer, because what it says is I have the ability as an influencer to make you do something. And that's simply not true. It is simply not true. Now, there's many ways to define an influencer. Many vanity metrics exist. And reach is vanity. Engagement is sanity. So if I can get you to like, retweet, say something, that is far more valuable to me than it appearing on 100,000 people's timeline that didn't bother reading it. But we have both metrics, and both metrics are used in the industry, and the utopia, the best pinpoint is to find one that has both a great reach and a great engagement rate. So what we do at Acumen is we assess the influencer level. Are they, do they have followers? Yes, tick. So they have the reach number, but do they have an engagement rate that's worth paying attention to? Do they get people to actually say and do something? Like, one of my favorite examples is Man's Not Barry Roo. I mean, that guy, even Julius Malema can't keep up. Like, he says one word and the thing goes viral, you know? That's a true influencer. Okay, yes, he has got 1 million followers, but he didn't start with 1 million followers. He started in the days of the Oscar trial, and he stayed relevant. He was relevant, he was funny, he was on point. And it was that caused him to grow as I want to say credible, but that's not really the word, but to a credible influencer, perhaps. He became a source. So if you want to know what's happening, what's going down with corruption in this country today, or somebody who's given bad service, please go check his timeline and you'll know exactly what's happening in 2 minutes. The same can be said for Barry Bateman. You know, he also had his big shining moment back in the Oscar Pistorius trial days. But again, if you're looking for credible news and answers to specific questions about fraud and corruption, you'll go straight to Barry Bateman. And those are true influencers. Then you get so-called micro-influencers, my favorite. These guys are so underrated. These are guys that will get 2 or 3 people to actually do something. But those 2 or 3 people will actually spend money, or they will actually react, and they will pay attention to what their micro-influencer has to say. And we're seeing bubbles of them because they are niched industries. So you will find a micro-influencer in the foodies game. He hasn't got that like huge reach, but because he's an expert on, I don't know, shellfish, and his reviews are amazing about the places that have shellfish, you will go to him particularly as a micro-influencer. He may only have 500 followers, but he's important. And that's what I'm loving about the dynamic of social media, to be honest.
So as a micro-influencer, what are they defined by? Is it not the number of followers that they have, or is it the impact?
It really is engagement. It's engagement and what their niche market is, you know. I suppose you could consider Tonya Khoury a micro-influencer when it comes to media statistics, right? If you want to know what happened this week in the media and what social media had to say about it, you'd look up Tonya. And that's a good space to be. And that's where people can start making money and choosing their influencers accurately. So another thing the technology does so beautifully is it pulls out whether they're a good influencer or a bad influencer. Do they love you or do they hate you? Do they work for the opposition? You know, those type of nitty-gritties. And then you can see trends with certain influencers. You'll see they always pick on certain brands, and that data will come to the fore, you know. So, and then measuring it. How much are they worth? What time of day is good to use them? You know, all these little tricks come out when you use this technology. It's great.
Okay, so from your perspective, what impact does influencer marketing have on the world at large, from the insights that you see on a daily basis?
Yeah, look, I think when it's bad news, influencers make an enormous impact on your brand. It takes, like, one slightly negative story can be amplified to an absolute crisis because of certain influences, and that's the power of social media influencers, really, from a brand's perspective. From a positive perspective, endorsements are always a win, unless they're contrived. You know, like sometimes you can see, okay, they paid for that. You know. Also, when you have a cause or a CSI project or things like that, there's also a lovely mechanism to get that out. Fashion, entertainment, all these things have moved online. You know, like, we can't go to the shops anymore. Well, we shop online. So if my favorite Instagrammer says that particular product is worked for her skin and I relate to her, the chances are I'm going to try it out, you know. So influencers do have an impact. It does depend what the industry is, though, and it does depend on what the situation is. I mean, I've seen people waste a lot of money and get not one bang for their buck, you know, because they had like this huge following on from Instagram profiles, and then they'll put out one post and nobody will engage. So you paid all that money just because there's somebody bought a whole bunch of bots in the background.
Okay, and do you think from your experience, when you've worked with clients, have you had to educate them in terms of what metrics they should be focusing on, or if they have the wrong influences, have you had to have those kinds of tough conversations with clients?
Measuring the media is a very difficult job, and it's even more difficult because people have been taught for decades to use rand values against a measurement of successful campaigns. So we call that metric AVE or AEV, whichever way you want to use the acronym. But basically what it stands for is advertising value equivalent. So it tries to measure the occupied space by advertising terms. And that worked when you did print, radio, and television, because they all have rate cards and they know exactly how much 30 seconds costs and how much the front page ad costs. So that was relatively easy to do. But now, once you move into online, there's no rate card for Man's Not Barry Roo. None whatsoever. You know, let's be fair, there's no rate card for at 5FM. So though that's when it becomes very tricky to go back to the box we were using in the good old days. So people sadly have brought that measurement with them. And I think it's because there's a disconnect between the marketing individuals and the financial individuals in an institution. You know, marketing often gets a hard time with their budgets because the person doing the bean counting can't actually see a tangible asset for the cash that's being spent. But the truth is that if you aren't regularly being on top of your social media presence or non-presence, if you choose not to be there, that doesn't mean, just because you're not there doesn't mean people won't talk about you. They will. So if you're not managing that aspect, you have completely missed the boat and you are wide open for a complete annihilation. I mean, we've seen brands disappear. Bell Pottinger. We took down Bell Pottinger as a set of South Africans on Twitter. That's how it happened, you know. So it does have an enormous power behind it. And trying to explain to clients that it's a little bit more than an advertising value metric, that what you should be looking at is, did it change people's perspective about my brand? Did they love me more? Did they hate me more? What is it within the content that I put out that people actually read? What did they like to read about, and what made them angry to read about? Once you start measuring that, then you say, okay, who's behind that angry messaging, or who's behind that bit that really boosted that campaign? And then you can start seeing, these are my influencers. And that's the true value. Like, if it makes an impact on your brand that you can see over time, from a media presence perspective, you don't need a monetary measure, because you'll see it in your workplace. It will come out in your workplace.
Okay. And in terms of what you measure, how minute, what kind of detail do you get to in terms of social listening? Is it just positive sentiment, negative sentiment, number of mentions? How detailed can it get?
So firstly, it's interesting to understand the back-end process. So we measure over, I think it's 150 million news sites, okay? And then we have license agreements with Twitter, with Facebook, with Instagram, and we comply, because I don't know if you remember, there was this big story about privacy, and Facebook there was a delete Facebook, which came again this year, but the last one was about privacy issues. So now there has to be a level of huge compliance when you are scraping data from their platforms, and it can only be done in a certain way. So we get licenses from every social media provider, including the likes of Twitch and LinkedIn and TripAdvisor and all these apps that are out there. And we then put it into a big data pipe, right? And then we isolate by keywords. So if you are, for example, a car brand, we would put the car brand's name in, and it would pop up with everything about the car brand. Now, the problem with dealing with any client, is, especially a large client, is you are plagued by irrelevant data. So we have to cut through the noise. So we're not interested as a car brand in, for example, secondhand cars. Or if there was an accident, like these things are not selling at the motor car. So we would then refine those keywords so that you got exactly what you were looking for through that data wave. And then once you're through and you've got that data, then we'd be able to tell you how often you were mentioned, exactly when you were mentioned. The system works at 0.02 seconds after posting. It is lightning fast.
Wow.
And then it learns. So you talk about sentiment. Yes, it certainly does sentiment. But it does sentiment to such a degree that it doesn't just look at negative and positive. It looks at ecstatic to fuming. And it gives you every emotion in between, and why they were like that, what words made them like that, and who said it, and when they said it, who responded. So it goes down to 5 levels of any one story. It crosses platforms. So if a story started in news and ended up on Twitter and there it exploded, then you'll be able to see how it traveled over time. But very importantly is it has artificial intelligence and neural learning that is by far the fastest in the world. So if you are, for example, let's say you are the Hawks, or let's take a better example. Let's say you are the Katrina Foundation, right? And you are now going to deal with corruption. So you come out with strong messaging against corruption. The system, because it sees the word corruption or fraud or theft, is going to automatically assume it's negative. So, and it is negative, but it's not negative for the efforts from the Katrina Foundation. So what we then do is we train the machine. takes an hour and a half or so to train the machine to see whose perspective it's looking at and to refine its sentiment analysis. And once it's learned, it goes backwards retrospectively, which is also a big one, and it starts to apply within, I think it's 0.5 seconds or something. It starts to apply across the board. It's very, very fast and very accurate. And sentiment is a huge factor. In fact, it's probably the only thing that you need to worry about.
Okay, and when people engage your company, if they're running, a client is running an influencer campaign, do they get in touch with you at the end, or are you involved sometimes from the beginning of the process?
It's very important to involve us from the very beginning. Like I said, you know, with the Facebook privacy issues, you are not allowed to track without full permission. So we have to have that permission, and we can only start from there on certain social media platforms. I mean, with other data, we can go back a good 30 days, in fact, up to 8 years if you wanted to. But with the social media platforms, and let's be fair, those are the ones that really count, there you would have to connect certain tokens and in order to give us permission to track. But you were asking how a client engages, and I think it's important to know that there's lots of toys like this on the market, okay? Like mine is special because it's mine, and I believe mine's special, okay? But there are lots of toys like this. The point is that data only means something if you can interpret it. And my team and I have been working for decades, much longer than you need to know, on how to find the nuggets within the data that you really want to know about. So with every client, every month or on a campaign basis, we will consult against that data. So we will point out to you that man's not Barry Rood at this bit, or that the machine has now learned that it's a positive sentiment for the Katrata Foundation. So we will make sure that you understand that this influencer worked and this one didn't, and this guy's a problem, and this messaging people weren't so keen on it, but this messaging people loved. You know, so we take you through it because people haven't got time to sit and play with the machine. That's why we get paid. We play with the machine. You know, you're welcome to go and play, but if you don't have time, we've got your back.
So what does a day in your life look like?
Firstly, my poor computer, my poor laptop. It has several browsers open at any one time. And within those browsers, at least 20 tabs on each.
Wow.
When you are covering the news every second of the day, it's important to stay on top of it. So the laptop starts up in the morning and it has the news station going on in the background, and then all the regular tabs pop up, and then I go start crawling into the machine. And then, of course, you have the day-to-day running of businesses, you know, like a client may have a crisis, or they have a new campaign that they wanted to add to the tracking, or they want to report on whether this was effective or not. And then we will handle that. I've got myself and a team of consultants, they superstar analysts, because everything is now done for us through the machine. We just have to push out the results and tell you what it means, you know, which is a really cool job to have. So yeah, look, I do pull up my hair's very gray, and that's because, like, for every news story that I had to handle, that's how it looks. We do some cool stuff with WhatsApp. We open crisis groups. So if you're a brand in crisis, then we will answer you through WhatsApp. We will send you news alerts of things that might be relevant to whatever it is you're concerned about. So it's got even faster than it was before. So on an ordinary day, a good 10 to 11 hours and of just news, really. And my head, then I go to sleep and I watch comedies that I couldn't possibly digest because my brain's just flat.
What are your favorite shows to watch when you're trying to just...
Currently I am so, like, I love Netflix. Thank you for Netflix, guys. Thank you so much. So currently, I finished Money Heist. I know everybody had a big thing about Money Heist, but it got me into Spanish Hollywood, and I haven't left. So I'm currently on the last season of Vis-a-Vis, which is called Locked Up in English. I don't know why, because Vis-a-Vis is a perfectly normal name. And it's been great. It's about a women's prison. And yeah, so that's been fun. And then I have British comedies on repeat that I've watched my entire life from childhood, that when I put them on, like, it's like a monotone for me, and I eventually fall asleep. So I normally end my night with a good old Faulty Towers or one of those.
Well, that sounds good. I'm glad to hear that even though you have your head stuck in data, you still find time to watch, even if you're watching absentmindedly, just to take your mind off all the data.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mustn't forget, Mucha, that I'm near the sea, hey? So I just take my step out of my front door and it's like, wow, did I go on holiday? So
I can't imagine how nice your view must be.
Oh, my view is exquisite. It's exquisite, and but I work very hard to be here. So I am personally, like, it's my full stop. It really is.
So from an influencer's perspective, as someone who looks at the back end of sentiment and all that data, what would you say an influencer should really focus on in order to grow their brand?
Okay, so if you're starting out, the first thing is have a base, build a nice base of content so that when people do land on your page, they're not confronted with just one or two pictures or one or two stories. Make sure that there is a historic base you're working off before you even start considering yourself on an influencer path. And then depending on which media type you're using, I mean, let's look at Twitter, for example. It's quite easy to gain followers by staying relevant. So whatever's trending at the time, they call it hashtag hijacking, but I think that's the whole point of places like Twitter. But jump on the hashtag and put in valid content people want to read, okay? Not just some arbitrary content. So as long as you stay relevant, and this is the key, you have to be consistent. You can't do social media today and not tomorrow. You can't do it on a Monday and then not do it again until Thursday. That's not how social media works. Specifically on a platform like Twitter, if you are silent, you're dead within 30 seconds. Like the voice has to be there all the time. With Instagram, it's a completely different ball game. I mean, there, be beautiful. Those are the rules of Insta. Be beautiful, be eye-catching, and if you're going to be video, make sure in the first few seconds that you really grip that person's attention, because they will automatically bounce off if you haven't hooked them. And then the Facebookers, one of my favorite platforms, only because I'm a bit old, but really, in all seriousness, for me, it's a platform that allows you to do a lot. You can write as much as you like, for example, not like other platforms like LinkedIn. You have keyword limits and the same on everybody else. You also can use video and imagery together, and so I like the platform. With Facebook, funny works. If you can take a sense of humor to Facebook, you're going to win. And you can use that sense of humor to be relevant. Like, you don't, I'm not just saying post jokes. I'm saying, like, if you can catch people's attention about something that is really driving us crazy, and you put a funny spin on it, Facebook is a good place to be. Twitter does the same thing. I mean, death by memes, that's definitely Twitter. And then LinkedIn, just a brilliant platform. I mean, there you just push a button and you've got your CV. So make sure that what you've put on there is relevant. Keep that stuff updated. There's influencers on LinkedIn are a little bit more difficult because there's that two-way handshake within the system as well. So it's a bit difficult. They're starting to get the idea of following companies and that sort of thing. It really is a personal CV space at its best. But it's trying to be a social media platform, and it's working. It certainly is working.
Okay, and do you sometimes have to do like a background check of sorts on influencers for campaigns on behalf of clients?
Absolutely. Like, bots are real. People buy clicks. They really do. Don't think they don't. So fortunately, our system has some very, very cool filters that it goes through before it even gets to us. One of that is the robots. And when the bots come out, it does put it in a box for you so that you can see, okay, this is not real, guys. Don't even bother with yourself. And also, it's easy to find them because it's a computer, there's a repetitiveness about it. So the system will show, okay, it's every day at 9 o'clock exactly on the dot, and then you can see, okay, but that can't be human. So it picks up bots really easily. The other thing is it goes through, there is so much pornography out there. It's just insane. So the system puts it through a whole porn filter to make sure that you don't end up with a bunch of nudie images in your data that may not be relevant. I mean, we deal with a sugar brand, like the word sugar, you have no idea what it can bring back.
Wow. I don't even want to know.
You don't.
So with COVID, what do you see being the impact of the COVID pandemic on influencer marketing?
I think it is, the time is now. The time is now for any form of influence in online. Like, getting your name into a news article is gold. Getting your name onto an influencer's list is gold. The established influencers, if you haven't done it already, you should have audited your current status out there in the media, what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, and that you're doing right, why it worked, so that you can make it even bigger next time. I mean, there's some crackers out there. You look at people like Nando's and Chicken Licken. Those guys, like, they hit the marketing, the online space, and they just take it home, and it's a beautiful thing. Nike's another one. I don't know if you saw Nike the other day.
Yes,
outstanding. So, I mean, yeah, right. So, and then, like, from COVID-19's perspective, we can't leave. You're looking at me. This is as good as I'm going to get for months to come, from what we can understand. So, if ever there's been an opportunity to take advantage of the online space, it's now. And if you haven't already, then there's something wrong.
No, I think that's definitely good advice. Also, because some people have been trying to be influencers, but they haven't been as consistent. And COVID has shown us that if you can't do it even from the comfort of your home, then you might not be doing it as correctly as you think.
Yes, Mucha, it's an interesting space. Some people can make the switch very quickly. They pick it up and run with it. Other people are really struggling to think, well, this is it. I don't have to get up, go in and get transport, get to a place, sit behind a desk, make a cup of coffee, open my laptop. No, all that's gone. And for a lot of people, that's a big adjustment, a huge one. Fortunately, and I would hope, for social media influencers or people who work in this industry, this should be a no-brainer. It should be what we've been calling for, So if you are calling yourself an influencer and you are struggling behind the laptop, this is not for you. But you said it on the nose. Consistency is key. You will disappear in a second on social media. There's too much of it. So if you don't stay relevant and top of mind, they'll just forget you very, very quickly.
Definitely. And from a brand perspective, why should a brand invest in influencer marketing? We've seen it done correctly and we've seen it done terribly.
Yeah.
But why should they do it?
Influencer marketing does depend on the brand. Like,
Mm,
if you are an accounting firm and you have 2 or 3 people, you don't need a social media set of influencers, but you do need social media, and
yes.
that is important, right? But let's say we get into we're speaking about a brand that does have a reasonable social media presence already, with or without their own accounts. Okay, influencers can turn the tide in one direction or another. Influencers can ensure that your campaign does get airtime, and that's important. You know, that you've got these cool campaigns, but because there's no influencers behind it, there's a couple of posts and then they disappear. You know, like I saw somebody do an amazing study, and it lived on Twitter for literally half an hour, where had it had influencers behind it, that story could have lasted all day, maybe even days, because the content was that good. So if you have got something to say, then use, and you're big enough to warrant it, use the influencer. Absolutely use them. You know, it gives credibility to a certain degree. It gives presence across areas that you wouldn't be able to reach yourself. It gives a new audience the opportunity to learn via third party about your brand. And that's gold. That's called word of mouth on the streets, you know.
Mm.
So, yeah, influencer marketing is very important, but do it right. Like, we've seen some appalling ones, good heavens.
Yeah, so Tonya, I must say I really appreciate your candor and your vulnerability that you have, given to us on Digital Fanta specifically. I recall recently we were debating the issue of the black and white images and the whole trend that came about as a result. And someone challenged us as women to take up that challenge, but in a sense of self. So to say, who is Tonya and why are you Tonya? And I recall you also shared that you have chronic depression.
Yep.
So when I read that, I was firstly so amazed at how easy it was for you to share that. But I also then thought, how do you live your life working around sentiment, especially in a world where we're living with a lot of negative sentiment? How do you do it?
Well, you're quite right. I think it's remarkable that I'm still sane with reading all the negative headlines. Well, sane, not so sure. But yeah, the negative headlines don't help a chronic depressant at all. I've lived with my disorder for a very long time, since I was a teenager. So I've learned to deal with the dark cloud when it appears, and I'm not scared to admit that I have an issue. You know, and I think the thing with Women's Month and these, I'm rolling my eyes, sorry, but the thing with Women's Month and these, tag a friend because like then you feel empowered. Like, to me, it just feels like such a wasted opportunity, when you could take that opportunity when you tag that friend to say, hey, you know what? I suffer from chronic depression. If you do too, we can have a chat. The next time you feel low, give me a shout. We'll talk it through. And I'll tell you what I've learned. You'll tell me what you learned. Maybe we can help each other out. My journey with the weekly report is a very long one. And I finally, I'm very excited about that weekly report. I get up on a Friday morning at 4 a.m. to do that report. And I open up every news article that we have pinned as big news for the week or big social media, and then I read them all. So it started about 6 or 7 years ago with the Oscar trial. We were measuring how big Oscar Pistorius was across the world, and it took, all of a sudden the media was like, wow, that's really fascinating, tell us more. So that's where it started, and then we started measuring Oscar versus other things. So Oscar Pistorius versus the World Cup, you know, and then Oscar would be bigger, and they'd be like, oh, wow, that's even more fascinating. And then when the trial disappeared, we started to measure the big top 10 stories of the week. So, and literally we would put in 300 stories and pull out what was the top 10. It was such a difficult task. I don't know why I did that to myself. But I didn't even do that. I did one for news and one for social media because they're different, and then compared the two. So I did that for the longest time. Must have been 4 years. We produced what was called the Media Hit Parade. And and it was unbiased in that there was only pictures and a couple of tweets that accompanied those pictures to say this particular story was bigger than that particular story. And then the more I did it, and given my personality, as you now know me from the group, like I can't hold my tongue. So when people would phone and say, okay, I'm from so-and-so radio station and I want to know more about the statistic you pulled out, then I'd let my Lebanese tongue out and I would say exactly what I felt, and people like that. And now today, it's become less about the numbers and more about the sentiment. What do people think? You know, what have they been saying? But give it to me like it is. And can you please just summarize the week? Because, and this is what I'm finding, we've got media fatigue. We want to keep up with everything. We want to be on top of it, or we don't have the time. And FOMO is so big. Like, we are so scared we missed some big story. So the weekly report has become almost a place for people who don't want to do media anymore, that want the summary of the week, but want to draw and then put some statistics at the bottom so I can see that you didn't lie about what you were saying. You know, so it's become like that. It's been a brilliant journey for me, because what has happened is every week on a Friday, I'm top of mind of a bunch of people. So they may not speak to me for months, but they will, when they call, say, listen, I have got business for you. And by the way, love those weekly reports. You know, so it's a constant way to stay in touch with a market that may not use me today, but may still use me at some point.
Yeah, no, I love those weekly reports myself. And from the time that we've had you on the group, it's been amazing to see your journey from how you presented them. And now with the video element, I'm actually really enjoying it.
Oh, thank you. Like, it's been such a journey for me today. Like, even today I learned something new. And yeah, embedding video into the content has been a big leap forward, because again, people don't have to have time. I mean, some of those reports are almost 2,000 words long. People don't have time to read that, so they'll glance through it. But with a video of 2-3 minutes, you'll spare that time if it's got something, you know, if you're going to catch up with the whole week, and here's someone who's pretty opinionated about it.
No, it's definitely always nice to see the face behind the insights. So keep it up, keep it up.
Thank you so much. It means a lot.
Before we end off, I have two questions. So the first one is, if someone is watching and they think they love data, and they want to go into what you do, what should they do? What steps can they take in order to know if this is the right career path for them?
So I will say, for media monitoring, as it's traditionally known, we like to call it conversational insights now. We've got fancy words for it. But media monitoring is certainly not for everybody. You would have to have an analytical brain. So Very much someone who can do algebra, like, because there's a lot of coding involved. So you'd have to have a bit of a maths brain on you. But more importantly, your data interpretation is key. You can miss the whole story if you don't understand how to interpret data. And I don't know if that's a skill that can be taught. I think that's a skill that's learned over time. So if someone had to enter my industry from very base level, you would probably end up listening to a radio station and summarizing it day in and day out. Very, very boring work, but you'll understand why the machine has to work the way it has to work. Or you may very well be cleaning data. So you may be going through a set of results data and removing anything that relates to research reports. Like, it can be that boring. I want to say don't even bother yourselves. But I'm not going to discourage people from going into my industry. It's a niche industry, so there's not a lot of companies out there. So if you are interested in data and analytics, like, market research is a nice broad spectrum. You don't confine yourself to media. So I'd encourage you to look at market research positions, and they're any form. You can start with anything, because there you have the data and you're doing the research, and you'll slowly learn the skill of data interpretation. But if you wanted to go into my industry, the like Acumen Media is doing, you need to know your news, know what makes news, and know what makes social media. Understand how something can go from nothing to viral in seconds and why. Like, that's the skill that's needed to work successfully in this industry. Or you can be the person who pushes the data in, and that's quite a boring
different aspect. Okay. And seeing as though it's Women's Month, I personally, I love a lot of things about you. As I mentioned before, I love how vulnerable you are, and you've made me realize that vulnerability is not a weakness. So before I let you go, I just want to find out if there's any words of wisdom that you would give fellow women.
Like, I think that if we are so lucky to be women. We have such a emotional level of intelligence that we're born with. We are soft and we are hard. We can go from completely one end of the spectrum to the other. We have so much talent. We can work, bear children, take care of elderly, and then kick ass in the boardroom. Like, that's women. We can wear pants and skirts. That's women. And I've got such a big thing about sisterhood. I really do. I have only found success, sorry to say, but working with women. I've had some brilliant men work with me, but if I had to choose a crew, it'll be a female crew every day. We have an attention to detail that you cannot find in the male gender. And that's because we're built to do a million things at once, to close the oven door with your leg while you got the baby under the arm, and while you're talking on the cell phone, and and watching that the cat doesn't get out of the door. Like, that's us. So when it comes to women, I am always in awe of what we are able to achieve. And I just hate things like Women's Month. Sorry. I hate things like those black and white photos that don't do anything. So if you're going to do anything this Women's Month, just take one woman you haven't met before, or one woman you haven't spoken to in ages, and see if you can help each other in some way. Like, maybe she knows somebody who is interested in your services, or you know somebody who might be interested in hers. Maybe it's just a cup of coffee to say, you know what? Yeah, I had a very bad week last week, and I need to laugh. So can we just have a chat on the phone and talk rubbish for the next 20 minutes? Is that okay with you? And any sister will say yes. You know, that's us. That's us.
Yeah.
So I'm besotted with women. I think we're great. But let's not waste it. Let's otherwise take Women's Month and put it in the bin, because it's just another label. We don't need labels. We're not interested in labels.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tonya. I really enjoyed this chat, and I'm sure our viewers are going to enjoy listening to this and listening to you. I'm sure you will get some followers on your YouTube channel. Please subscribe to Tonya's YouTube channel and catch up on those amazing Friday tidbits that she shares with us.
Thank you very much, guys. And again, you do great work at Digital Fanta, and it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Tonya.